What if I told you there was a lost message capable of changing how we understand Mary's warnings? Imagine for a moment a forgotten symbol, an instruction hidden among letters and prayers, something that could shed new light on the 7 unrevealed messages of Medjugorje. Have you ever experienced that moment when a reading, a vision, or even a dream seems to whisper that something greater is happening? Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you. Since 1981, millions have heard and repeated the words attributed to Mary, and within these words are interwoven threads: conversion, prayer, fasting, family protection, silence, and vigilance. But what if within this fabric lies a stitch that has been lost to time, a symbolic seal that holds the deeper meaning of this Marian warning? I'm not speaking of easy dates or predictions, but of a practical and urgent call: how to live faith. More clearly, how to protect the home, and how to discern true signs amid the noise. On this video, we'll explore this Marian revelation that few remember. We'll delve into the 7 unrevealed messages of Medjugorje and translate these guidelines into steps anyone can understand and apply. This isn't sensationalism. It's an invitation to reflection and action. Prepare to hear stories, interpret symbols, and understand why so many families report transformative fruits when they dedicate themselves to the prayer and fasting suggested by the messages. As I tell stories and explain symbols, think about your own home. What spiritual practices exist there? Is there a space of silence where important decisions are made? How is family prayer going? These questions aren't rhetorical, they're the key to making sense of the lost seal in everyday life. Mary's warning often appears disguised as routine. It's a call to conversion that involves small sacrifices, a fast that purifies desires, and moments of silence that open space for discernment. It's not about fear, but about responsibility. The prophecies and messages of Medjugorje, when read with care and humility, call for concrete inner transformation. And this is precisely where the lost seal acts, as a reference point that guides the faithful to apply prayer, fasting, and vigilance without falling into panic or superstition. Let's also look at the domestic signs that accompany this transformation: simple gestures, routine blessings, and family decisions that can change course. Throughout the introduction, I'll seed images and questions that will help you follow the investigation: an old envelope marked with a stamp, a prayer said at midnight, a family gathered in silence. All of this sets the stage without revealing the outcome. If any of these images have ever touched you, write "I'm with you" in the comments. I want to know who's ready to listen and act. And if you feel this topic touches you more closely than it seems, stay with me until the end. Before we continue, it's important to emphasize a point of caution. Interpreting messages and prophecies requires humility and responsibility. The stance of religious authorities and community discernment will be part of our focus because, above all, this topic requires caution. In the following scenes, we'll open letters, hear testimonies, and piece together this spiritual puzzle without alarm, just with clarity and respect. Now breathe, open your heart, and prepare yourself. In the next segment, I'll show you where we begin to rebuild this lost seal and what signs you can observe in your home today. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you something very sincere. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most in experience, an intuition, even a question. Sharing what you've experienced or felt isn't just about telling a story. It's about helping others recognize themselves and find the courage to seek change. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. And each comment becomes part of the dialogue we want to build about prayer, protection, and discernment. If any image or phrase during the video resonated with you, write "I'm with you," or briefly, tell me what happened. I read everything, and, whenever possible, I'll include these testimonies in future videos. If you're enjoying this investigation and want to see the 7 unrevealed messages unfold, please like the video. This simple gesture helps me know that I must continue bringing you research, interviews, and real stories. And, of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. This way, you'll help more families find these reflections and also ensure that I can dedicate time to delve deeper into this topic and bring you more episodes with care and responsibility. It's not advertising, it's a partnership. When you comment, like, and subscribe, you're allowing transformative stories, like the ones we'll hear, to reach those who need them. Now that we're in this together, take a deep breath. In the next block, I'll begin opening the letters and showing where the first trace of the lost seal is, with evidence and stories that will connect the messages of Medjugorje to the lives of those who truly practice the faith in their daily lives. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, and to do so, we need to go back to the beginning of history, not as a dry summary of dates, but as the point where a hidden truth began to insinuate itself into the lives of ordinary people, young people who suddenly received a voice inviting them to conversion. On June 24, 1981, in the small village of Medjugorje, 6 young people saw what they described as the Virgin Mary, and from this encounter emerged messages that, over the years, have been repeated, translated, and embraced by millions of pilgrims. This is the title page of our research: Simple People, Called to Something Extraordinary, and a sequence of words that, in many cases, generated real transformation in the lives of those who embraced them. What's striking is not just the phenomenon itself, but the journey of those who went there and returned changed. There are numerous reports of lasting conversions, of people who reconfigured their mindset, their daily decisions, and their family dynamics after experiencing the spiritual atmosphere of that place. Tensions dissolved, habits changed, places became veritable backdrops to a new life of prayer. This impact is not just emotional, it is practical, visible in the routines of homes that began to set aside time for silence, for the rosary, for presence at a communal table of faith. Among the messages repeated over the decades, constant themes emerge: conversion, prayer, fasting, family protection, silence, and vigilance that function as guiding principles of a spiritual compass. Hundreds of cataloged communications intersect these principles. Some authors even say they are threads of the same fabric, while others speak of spiritual weapons that tradition itself recognizes as transformative practices. When you look at these recommendations with a practical eye, you realize that many of them are proposals for internal transformation, a shift in mindset that leads to different decisions: praying before deciding, fasting before reacting, seeking silence before responding. But where does the lost seal come in? Think of the seal as a metaphor for a cohesive element, something that, when found, gives meaning to the sequence of messages. It's not a physical item you can hold. It's an interpretive key, a lens that makes the various instructions converge toward a single purpose: the integral transformation of the person and the home. This seal acts as a decision point. It silently asks, what will you do today to make your faith have a real impact on your family? And this simple question changes the course of small choices, which, when added together, have great effects. By recognizing this seal, the message ceases to be merely theoretical and becomes a primer for everyday practices, a roadmap for those who wish to live their faith with greater clarity and courage. Connecting the subjective experience of pilgrims with practical evidence is part of the work of those who seek to understand the phenomenon without falling into either cold skepticism or sensationalism. We observed families who changed their prayer times together, neighborhoods who resumed blessing rituals in their homes, people who, moved by a deep feeling, began to prioritize silence and discernment before making important decisions. These domestic signs don't always make headlines, but they have a real impact on the quality of relationships and the stability of everyday choices. And this is where the seal loses its mystical aura and reveals itself as something deeply human and operational. There is also the institutional layer that deserves attention. Over time, ecclesiastical authorities observed spiritual fruits, yet urged prudence in authenticating alleged apparitions. This stance does not diminish the value of conversions or testimonies. On the contrary, it calls the community to collective discernment, to a mindset that prioritizes the common good and pastoral care. This tension between popular enthusiasm and institutional caution is in itself a behind-the-scenes element of this story. It reveals how hidden truth sometimes requires patience, to be understood slowly and responsibly. By examining the language of the messages, we realize that they are not merely abstract spiritual commands, but guidelines that influence concrete decisions. Who should be invited to family prayer? What small sacrifices can purify harmful desires? What kind of silence fosters discernment at a crossroads? The proposed transformation is, therefore, twofold: interior because it changes the mind and heart, and exterior because it changes practices, schedules, and priorities. And it is in this encounter between interiority and action that the seal reveals its potential. It is the synthesis that translates revelations into daily practices with real impact. The stories of those who experienced this change are instructive. Telling the before and after story of a family that resumed nightly prayer, for example, helps us understand the power of routine. It's not an immediate miracle, but a gradual process of adjusting mindsets and habits, a journey that often requires difficult decisions such as giving up leisure time for prayer or choosing silence over impulsive reactions. These small sacrifices act as catalysts for transformation. Together, they reorient the flow of life toward a greater focus on inner truth and the common good. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, and that means opening the symbolic cards that support the seal. We'll analyze how each of the central elements, conversion, prayer, fasting, protection, silence, and vigilance, appears in the accounts and what practical clues they leave us to apply in our daily lives. We'll also look at the less obvious revelations, those hidden in everyday gestures and therefore easily overlooked. In doing this work, we aim to bring clarity to those seeking to apply these messages without falling into extremes, always maintaining respect for the authorities and the community that follows these signs. Comment here. I'm on this journey to now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And to do so, we need to accurately name what we call the 7 unrevealed messages. Not as a rigid list or dogma, but as a thematic thread that runs through decades of communication and reveals a practical logic. For those who want to transform their lives and the lives of their families, these 7 threads, conversion, prayer, fasting, family protection, silence, vigilance, and the final warning, were not hidden by chance. Rather, they appear as a layered map, a hidden truth that unfolds when we observe not only the words, but also the gestures they inspire in daily life. Imagine a tapestry where each thread has its own color and texture. Together, these 7 colors form an image that, when found, functions as an interpretative seal. It gives coherence to the revelations and guides practical decisions, shaping a mindset and a journey of transformation with real impact. The first message, that of conversion, is the starting point and also the pulse of transformation. It is not a vague conviction or a fleeting feeling. It is a daily invitation to realign priorities, reevaluate decisions, and adjust life's course according to a deeper truth. In practice, conversion means concrete choices, abandoning habits that corrode relationships, setting aside time for what builds, asking for forgiveness, and reconciling. It is a change of mindset that impacts small things: the tone of voice with children, patience with one's spouse, the decision to prioritize integrity over immediate. When these choices are repeated, the whole household feels the difference. And then a kind of seal effect begins to operate. Conversion is no longer just internal. It begins to mark routines and environments. The second message names the driving force behind this change: prayer. I'm not talking about a mechanical prayer, recited with eyes closed, as if it were a checklist, but a practice that redirects attention and fuels the courage to act. Prayer for families in crisis. Prayer for professional decisions. Prayer for those who can't find meaning. All of this appears in the words attributed to Mary. And all of this has a practical effect. Regular prayer reorganizes priorities, helps clear the mind before making important decisions, and creates a culture of care within the home. This is why so many people describe the experience of going to Medjugorje and returning with a renewed spiritual routine. The repetition of the prayerful gesture gradually shapes a new mindset. The third line is fasting, understood here as conscious renunciation. It's not just deprivation. It's a discipline that creates space for better listening. When someone decides to fast even for small things, like reducing social media time, it opens a channel of attention that fosters discernment. In practical terms, fasting acts as a filter on impulsive decisions. Those who fast learn to delay their reactions, to choose more calmly, to prioritize what is essential. This element has a social impact. Those who practice renunciation frequently infect their families, proposing a new rhythm of life that can reduce tension and increase cohesion. The fourth message directly concerns the home. Family protection. Here, we're not talking about amulets or empty rituals, but concrete practices, regular blessings, family prayer, moments of silence and reconciliation that act as domestic policies of care. These practices create a climate where important decisions are made communally and where changes in mindset translate into protective actions, coexistence agreements, educational priorities, choices about activities that build or erode bonds. The seal appears when we realize that these measures, repeated consistently, form a kind of gentle fortress, capable of transforming challenges into opportunities for growth. The fifth message is silence, a recommendation that, paradoxically, has a lot to do with communication. Silence here isn't absence. It's a space where the mind and heart can align before speaking. In an era of constant noise, silence is a framework for more sensible, less reactive decisions to be made. Cultivating moments of family retreat, a dinner without cell phones, a prayer before bed, a time for spiritual reading creates the conditions for the hidden truth to surface. It's in silence that many people report feeling invitations or clues to change jobs, forgive someone, or take a courageous step. The sixth line is vigilance, a call for calm attention. Here, the term doesn't convey alarmism, but responsibility. Vigilance means perceiving signs, evaluating trends, and acting prudently. Vigilance is being alert to what corrodes relationships, to the decisions that accumulate, and to the false narratives that confuse. Those who practice vigilance don't panic at every news item. Rather, they develop criteria for discernment, consulting the community, seeking guidance, and preserving the serenity to make thoughtful decisions. This exercise is essential so that messages don't become excuses for fear, but rather instruments of prudence and love. Finally, the seventh message, the final warning, brings everything together in a tone that isn't necessarily cataclysmic, but is nonetheless urgent. It calls for transformation now, before the toll of mistaken choices makes rebuilding more difficult. This warning serves as a call to spiritual intelligence, a final call that reinforces the need to seriously apply the other 6 messages. It's not about predicting dates, but about accelerating a journey. Those who heed this call learn to prioritize what truly matters, to adjust their mindset, and to make decisions that prioritize truth and the common good. By contemplating these 7 lines as a single movement like an interpretative seal, we discover that revelation lies not so much in making spectacular prophecies, but in transforming everyday decisions that generate lasting impact. The beauty of this pattern lies in its accessibility. It doesn't require great feats, but it does require consistency, repetition, and the courage to change habits. And when this consistency takes hold in the home, in relationships, and in choices, the lost seal ceases to be a distant mystery and becomes a practical guide for action. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding the messages, in theory, is one step, but recognizing how they manifest in the body of life in small choices, in routines, in family negotiations is where transformation is measured. So let's continue observing signs, stories, and clues that show how each of these lines has translated into real habits and decisions in the stories of those who have lived this experience. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because speaking of conversion as a word sounds nice, but what really matters is seeing how this change manifests itself in daily decisions, mindsets, and the small gestures that make up a family's journey. Urgent conversion is not an empty cry. It is a life-changing process that requires concrete actions. Returning to the sacraments, resuming the practice of confession, setting aside time on Sunday for the Eucharist, resuming dialogue at the table at home without rushing. It is a transformation that begins within a hidden truth that, when accepted, reorganizes priorities and has a visible impact on relationships. Think of someone who, for years, lived a fast-paced routine, working late, quick dinners, arguing over small things, decisions made in the heat of the moment. Now imagine that same person pausing for a few minutes every night to examine their conscience, seeking forgiveness in confession, and entering Sunday Mass with the firm intention of letting themselves be touched. A change in mindset occurs when the priority shifts from immediacy to the common good of the family. Decisions cease to be reactive and become guided by a higher standard. This is where conversion becomes practical. Fewer impulsive responses, more thoughtful choices. Less consumption of distractions, more seeking silence and prayer. In daily life, a return to the sacraments serves as a building block in this reconstruction. Regular confession helps clear the emotional terrain. Forgiving and being forgiven reduces resentments that erode bonds. The Eucharist, celebrated with presence and intention, gives strength to face temptations and weariness, offering an anchor for the decision to act coherently. It's not distant mysticism, it's spiritual discipline that produces practical results. A father who previously lost his temper now chooses to talk calmly before complaining. A mother who rushed through her routine discovers that giving her child 5 minutes of full attention has more educational power than an hour of rushed explanations. These small, repeated changes create an impact and alter the domestic environment. I want to tell a story that illustrates this transformation well. Without needing to seek spectacular miracles, it's a human example. Close to home, relatable, too many. Let's call this story Anna and Pedro. Pedro worked long shifts and came home exhausted. Complaining and irritation were constant, and the house was rife with small disruptions, bills discussed, children unattended in their dilemmas, and a tense silence at mealtimes. Anna, feeling that something needed to change, decided to propose a practical measure: resume Sunday Mass as a family and on Wednesday nights, have a moment of personal confession and reflection. At first, it was difficult resistance, fatigue, jokes about yet another task, but persistence prevailed. After a few months, their decisions changed. Before impulse buying, Pedro and Anna talked. Before reacting to provocation, they waited until a moment of silence. Any arguments that arose began to be mediated by apologies. What seemed small, going to Mass together, setting aside half an hour for silence, was reflected in larger decisions, redirecting savings toward a common purpose, rearranging schedules so one parent could oversee schoolwork, choosing a school that prioritized values over status. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, but it was real and lasting, because it shifted mindsets and guided decision-making. This account brings to light another important point. Urgent conversion also saves time and emotional energy. When a family adopts practices that promote reconciliation and presence, it avoids the accumulation of resentment that later consumes decades of rebuilding. The hidden truth that the seal helps us reveal is precisely this. Urgency isn't fear, it's care. It's understanding that small decisions, made with intention, generate an impact that ripples out into other areas of life: work, friendships, mental health. Transformation, therefore, has a ripple effect. A rhythm of prayer at home improves communication. Regular confession reduces psychological burden. Participation in the sacraments strengthens the courage to make difficult but necessary choices. In practical, everyday life, What decisions does this imply? It means setting a fixed time for family prayer, even if it's just 10 minutes. It means scheduling a moment of silence before important conversations. It means choosing to go to Mass on a Sunday when it would be more comfortable not to go. It means prioritizing verbal reconciliation when the first spark of conflict arises. It means, in simple terms, learning to pause intelligently before making decisions. These gestures may seem small, but when repeated, they reconfigure the collective mentality of the household. And this reconfiguration is what we call transformation, not a spectacle, but slow and steady effectiveness. The revelations that emerge from this process often appear behind the scenes. A conversation that resolves a misunderstanding before it. It becomes a crisis, an apology that restores trust, a gesture of renunciation that inspires children. The seal, understood as an interpretive sign, helps us see these behind-the-scenes events as part of a larger plan, not to control everything, but to propose a path of action and discipline. And it's important to remember that this journey is not linear. There will be setbacks, doubts, and setbacks. But the urgency evoked by the messages invites us not to postpone starting over. Small decisions today prevent future regrets. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic and show how, based on these practical examples and this mini-story, we can identify clear signs that conversion is taking place. Increased patience, fewer impulsive reactions, more intentional choices, and a domestic climate that fosters dialogue. Recognizing these signs is crucial for the message to stop being theoretical and begin to shape daily conduct. Comment: this makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject and talk about prayer as a true weapon of transformation, in the warlike sense of the word, but as an intelligent tool that reconfigures mindsets, decisions, and the entire routine of a household. When we say that prayer is the second message, we're pointing to a practice that acts at the level of priorities. It educates the eye, refines the heart, and provides criteria for courageous choices. In many accounts from pilgrims and those who experienced real changes after visiting Medjugorje, the prayer routine returned as a foundation. It's not just repeating words. It's establishing a spiritual climate that guides actions and preserves relationships from the wear and tear of everyday life. To make this practical, consider simple models that any family can adapt. Start with prayer for the world. 1 minute in the morning, offering the day for greater intentions for sick people, for public decisions, for choices that affect the community. This short gesture shifts the routine from ego to others, fosters empathy, and helps calibrate wiser decisions. Throughout the day, then, a specific daily prayer. It could be a rosary, an ejaculation, or a prayer of surrender, repeated with intention and presence. Repetition trains the brain to pause reflectively before reacting impulsively. In terms of transformation, this is equivalent to gaining a few seconds that avoid conflict or a hasty choice. Pilgrims often report recommended practices during pilgrimages, attending daily Mass, moments of adoration, and community rosaries. These elements serve a pedagogical function. They create discipline and a sense of belonging that lasts after the journey. Spiritual leaders who accompany pilgrimage groups always suggest a minimum practice that can be maintained at home. A weekly moment of adoration, reciting the rosary as a family once a week, and briefly reading a spiritual text before bed. These gestures, the guides insist, are not empty rituals. They are exercises in mindfulness that shape mindset and behavior. Spiritual vigilance permeates prayer. It's not watching out of fear, but with clarity. Praying for the world establishes a horizon. Praying as a family creates a protective environment. Vigilance is noticing when a decision or habit is straying from what we want to build. For example, if dinner conversations turn into routine complaints, common prayer can be a tool for reframing the family narrative, remembering priorities, reinforcing gratitude, and opening space for reconciliation. Vigilance, aided by prayerful practice, provides clarity to act at the right time. There are concrete practices that have proven effective in many accounts. Prayer before important decisions, a minute of silence, and a plea for discernment. Prayer for those suffering in the neighborhood, strengthening the sense of community, and a simple prayer of deliverance before bed to release fears and rest the mind. Another powerful technique is the nightly examination of conscience, a brief prayer reflection on the day, where one identifies where one went wrong and where one went right. This repeated examination encapsulates a process of ongoing conversion and is one of the most practical ways to incorporate a new mindset into daily life. A recurring example in stories is the family that establishes a moment of peace before meals. 2 minutes of silence, a short prayer, and a touch of gratitude. It may seem small, but this habit changes the tone of conversations and paves the way for calmer decisions. Another common story involves people who dedicated Thursday nights to praying for specific intentions for their family, their health, their work, and found that, by doing so, their decisions became less reactive and more guided by a collective project. These are signs of impact, small prayerful routines that change the dynamics of the home. The practical authority that comes from pilgrimages doesn't depend on titles, but on results. Those who return with a solid spiritual routine bring a living testimony to the community. And this testimony serves as a practical lesson. It's not about imposing practices, but about demonstrating that prayerful discipline produces measurable effects in the form of fewer conflicts, wiser choices, and an environment more conducive to truth and growth. The mindset that develops is one of responsibility and care, not fear and panic. Furthermore, it's helpful to remember that prayer and action go hand in hand. Prayerful action doesn't negate the need for concrete decisions. Quite the contrary, it illuminates them. Praying for a job doesn't replace the search for alternatives. Praying for family doesn't eliminate the need to discuss finances or education. What changes is the quality of the decision. When guided by prayer, the choice tends to prioritize the common good, coherence, and truth, reducing future regrets. This connection between prayer and decision-making is one of the great practical lessons the seal helps us decipher. For those who want to get started, the recommendation is simple and accessible. Choose two prayerful gestures that fit into your routine. One individual, for example, 5 minutes of prayer in the morning, and one as a family, for example, a brief prayer before dinner. Keep it up for a month and observe the signs. Have there been fewer impulsive reactions? Have conversations become more constructive? Has the routine gained a regulated silence that fosters better decisions? These indicators show whether the practice is having a real impact. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. Because understanding the practices is one thing, but recognizing how they integrate into daily life requires looking at stories and clues that reveal the mechanics of this transformation. So let's follow stories and examples that show, step by step, how the weapon of constant prayer was used to save relationships, guide decisions, and generate a lasting impact on the lives of those who decided to take this discipline seriously. Comment below, I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because speaking of fasting, a simple abstention reduces a powerful tool to an empty gesture. In the messages shared over time, fasting appears as a discipline, as inner endurance training, as a method to clear one's attention and prepare the heart to hear the hidden truth. It's not a test of physical endurance or a penance to gain points. It's a practical decision that changes one's mindset. And daily decisions, when someone decides to fast, something very concrete happens. A space is created. This space, previously filled with consumption, distraction, or immediate reaction, becomes occupied by presence, reflection, and, often, insights that transform one's way of choosing. Imagine reducing screen time before bed for 3 days, or giving up a usual dessert. These small acts of renunciation are exercises that strengthen the ability to say no to impulse and yes to what is a priority. Fasting, in the narratives of those who have experienced change, is often accompanied by intimate emergencies, a revelation about a relationship that needed repair, an intuition about a professional choice, a sudden clarity about priorities that had been unclear. This is why the term hidden truth appears frequently. Fasting doesn't create truth. It lays bare what already existed, allowing what was covered by noise to surface more easily. And when this happens within a domestic context, the impact is not merely theoretical, it alters habits, routines, and practical decisions that shape the future. Repeated practices generate transformation, a cultivated silence, I endured renunciation, a shared prayer, redraw the map of priorities and, little by little, alter the landscape of relationships. Fasting is also a form of inner solidarity. By giving up something to care for one's spirit, one demonstrates priority for the common good, the home environment, and the quality of relationships. Rather than being tied to an isolated gesture, renunciation becomes an instrument of transformation that is reflected in conversations, small daily courtesies, and the way conflicts are handled. In the accounts of many families who have gone through this process, fasting was the catalyst that allowed space for reconciliation, listening, and wiser decisions. This progressive transformation, this journey is not dramatic, but it is effective. It changes mindsets, guides decisions, and produces a lasting impact. 2. Make this accessible. I suggest a 3-day mini challenge. Choose a practical, concrete renunciation that fits into your routine. For example, cutting down on social media for 3 days, giving up dessert, avoiding watching TV at night, or cutting out an snack. During these 3 days, replace the freed up time or energy with a short habit of presence. 5 minutes of silence in the morning, a moment of spiritual reading, or a short, sincere conversation with a family member. Write down, in a few lines, a daily perception. What feeling emerged? What decision became clearer? This simple record transforms sensation into evidence and allows you to clearly see the real impact of the renunciation. It is important, however, to emphasize prudence and proportionality. Fasting is not about annihilating the body or disregarding personal limits. It is about adjusting habits wisely. People with specific health conditions, pregnant or breastfeeding women, or those with metabolic problems should consult a professional before beginning any more intense practice of food abstinence. Spirituality should not be confused with caring for one's own health. Taking care of the body is also an act of responsibility. The practical message we draw from these experiences is that transformation does not require extreme gestures, but rather requires consistency and repetition. Small acts, when consistent, generate a cumulative impact. In addition to the mini challenge, there are complementary practices that amplify the effect of fasting. Fasting from sensationalist news for a day, avoiding gossip for a period, and renouncing sarcastic comments that tend to hurt. These cognitive and verbal renunciations work on the same muscle as physical fasting. They train attention, gradually reshape the mindset, and promote more thoughtful decisions. Collectively, this translates into fewer destructive impulses and more choices that protect the home and the common good. When a family decides, for example, to establish a screen-free moment before meals, conversations arise that previously wouldn't happen. Opportunities for reconciliation arise, which gradually change the trajectory of relationships. The stories we've heard show that fasting becomes a bridge to other practices. After a period of renunciation, many people adopt more consistent prayer routines, resume sacraments, and reevaluate financial and emotional decisions more calmly. The interpretative seal we seek to identify manifests itself here. It is the synthesis that brings renunciation closer to transformative results. It's not distant mystique. It's a mechanism for change that can be applied and measured in daily life. Small victories, a difficult conversation conducted calmly, an apology that restored trust. The decision to prioritize the common good over immediate pleasure act as indicators that mindsets are shifting and that future decisions will be more coherent. To make it easier to practice, here's a simple plan for the 3 days of the mini challenge. Day 1, cut your social media time in half and replace it with 5 minutes of silence and a brief journal entry. Day 2, forego your usual dessert or snack for 24 hours and use the energy released for intentional prayer. Day 3, avoid criticism and gossip and take a moment to listen to a child or spouse without interrupting. These short gestures have a cumulative effect and are designed to generate impact without overdoing it. During the challenge, observe the behind-the-scenes aspects of your routine. What reactions arise when dessert is missing? How does the conversation at the table change when your cell phone is put away? Jot down a phrase, a feeling, or a small revelation that emerges. This journaling transforms perception into evidence. A shared journey often multiplies the impact and makes the transformation more sustainable. If possible, invite someone to join you. The dynamic of mutual accountability and sharing small victories creates breeding ground for stronger decisions and an impact that goes beyond the individual. Remember to preserve joy along the way. Discipline doesn't have to be austere to the point of exhaustion. Healthy renunciation often frees up energy to create moments of encounter, a simple, self-free dinner that becomes a memory, a conversation that rebuilds bonds. These small celebrations are signs that the transformation is becoming a habit and that the impact extends beyond the episode. Important. Practice with caution. If you have specific medical conditions, adapt your fast carefully. Renunciation should be proportionate and guided by well-being. The goal is not suffering, but adjusting habits so that your mindset and decisions become more aligned with what truly matters. Small, everyday triumph tone, open conversation, an apology, a silence that avoids arguments are clear signs of progress. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. And from here, we'll look at stories that exemplify how fasting and renunciation paved the way for practical revelations and decisions that changed family destinies. Comment: I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject and talk about something that directly touches the hearts of those who live their faith as a family. The protection of the home and the domestic signs that, when observed carefully, reveal a logic of care and transformation. Protection here is neither magic nor superstition. It is an intentional practice that combines prayer, simple blessing rituals, and a trained sensitivity to perceive subtle clues of the spirit in everyday life. When families report that something changed after adopting certain practices, they are not describing an inexplicable phenomenon, but a shift in mindset, a reconfiguration of habits and decisions that has a real impact on relationships, emotional climate, and decisions. This transformation has a backstage, renewed conversations, adjusted schedules, repositioned priorities. And it is in this fabric of small choices that the hidden truth of the messages begins to palpably reveal itself. Protecting the home, according to the guidelines circulating around Medjugorje, involves concrete and repeated actions. Blessing the surroundings, praying as a family, setting aside time for silence before important decisions, and cultivating rituals of presence that normalize spirituality in daily life. A simple blessing upon entering the house, a gesture of prayer at bedtime, a brief invocation before a meal. These are domestic signs that, when combined, create an atmosphere less susceptible to the shock of rushing and more conducive to dialogue. It's not about creating a perfect setting, but about building gentle defenses against the habitual tensions that corrode a relationship. Impatience, automatic disapproval, emotional isolation. These protective gestures act as policies of coexistence that shape decisions when the family has time for prayer before discussing a problem. Choices tend to be more considered and less reactive. The stories we gathered reveal very concrete routines. Families who instituted a brief prayer upon waking noticed a decrease in morning arguments. Others who began blessing their children's rooms reported a calmer atmosphere during study hours. Couples who adopted the practice of gratitude dialogue before bed noticed that resentments stopped building. These accounts, far from being isolated anecdotes, reveal a pattern of impact. Small, ritualized actions transform decisions, and coherent decisions change trajectory. The interpretative seal we seek this kind of lens that gives meaning to messages appears when we understand that protection is not a passive shield, but an active dynamic of care and choices. Beyond blessings and prayers, observing spiritual signs in everyday life requires a keen eye and a disciplined perception. Signs aren't necessarily miracles. They're often subtle bells, an intuition that arises before an argument, a dream that points to a necessary conversation, a sudden aversion to behavior that previously seemed normal. Learning to recognize these clues is training vigilance without falling into paranoia. It's developing a listening mindset that allows you to intercept problems before they take root. This attention training can be as simple as writing down small intuitions and checking, at the end of the week, whether they pointed to something that needed to be addressed. Thus, daily life becomes a laboratory of discernment, and the home begins to read its own signs as a practical manual for care. There are also community practices that reinforce domestic protection, neighborhood prayer groups, gatherings for spiritual reading, and moments of shared blessing. When families connect, protection ceases to be a mere individual initiative and becomes a social fabric that supports decisions and offers support in times of crisis. This communal aspect is one of the great secrets behind lasting conversions. The journey is rarely solitary. Those who walk together aid in discernment, point out misinterpretations, and witness changes that might otherwise go unnoticed. The collective impact helps to consolidate new routines and transform isolated revelations into a sustainable domestic culture. I want to tell a short story that illustrates this process clearly. Imagine a family whose routine was inconsistent. Everyone arrived home at different times, meals were quick, and conversations were limited to text messages. One day, after a series of minor crises and a visit to a friend who had returned from a pilgrimage, they decided to institute a prayer before dinner and a simple blessing upon entering the house. At first, they thought it was merely a symbolic gesture, but as the weeks passed, they noticed subtle changes. Their children began to share their experiences at school. Conversations that had previously been interrupted by screens gained depth, and decisions about commitments began to be discussed as a family, not made in isolation. The environment became more resilient in the face of difficulties, and choices began to be filtered by collective responsibility. This is an example of how protection, when applied consistently, alters the grammar of decisions and produces a lasting impact on family dynamics. Part of my argument is that protection requires intention and repetition. A single act, a house once has symbolic value, but effectiveness comes from repetition, from transforming gestures into habits. Discipline creates new neural pathways that support a different mindset. Habits shape automatic decisions that, over time, produce a new character in relationships. The patience to maintain simple routines, the courage to re-engage with difficult conversations, and the humility to ask for help are essential ingredients in this journey. Within these processes, the hidden truth of the messages ceases to be a distant enigma and becomes a practical map for concrete actions. It's also crucial to mention that domestic protection needs to go hand in hand with collective discernment. Not every sign should be read in isolation, and not every intuition is infallible. Therefore, creating spaces for dialogue with trusted people, spiritual leaders, or faith groups helps to check interpretations and avoid hasty conclusions. This exercise in community responsibility prevents the search for signs from becoming a search for confirmation of one's own fears. Healthy protection, therefore, combines prayer, routine, and shared wisdom, a triad that strengthens decisions and reduces the risk of destructive impulses. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, and from here, we'll analyze concrete examples of domestic signs that often precede important decisions, changes in children's habits, repetitive dreams, a sense of moral urgency in a work decision, or even the realization that certain relationships need healing. Understanding these signs and learning to react clearly is what transforms warnings into effective care. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because silence is not mere rest. It is a tool of spiritual intelligence that allows us to distinguish between noise and signal, between fear and calling, between theory and transformation. In a world where information flows at dizzying speed, Cultivating inner silence is an act of courage and strategy. It is opening space for the hidden truth to manifest itself without being stifled by anxieties, rumors, or hasty interpretations. Silence fosters discernment, and discernment, in turn, is the practical ability to make decisions with greater clarity and a smaller margin for error. When the message of Medjugorje speaks of silence, it is not proposing isolation or escape. It is suggesting a mental discipline that reorients the mindset, creating conditions for subtle revelations, those clues that emerge behind the scenes of life, to be perceived and translated into actions that generate a real impact on the family and community. Discernment is an active verb. It implies observing, comparing, consulting, and testing. First, observe the symptoms: anxiety that generates rumors, stories that ferment in groups without verification, dreams that promise cataclysms without consistency. Second, compare. Compare these impressions with spiritual tradition, with the guidance of trusted people, and with criteria of historical prudence. Third, consult. Share your insights with someone you trust, a spiritual leader, a balanced friend, a calm family member, and listen to their feedback. And finally, test before acting impulsively. Try small steps that don't compromise your life, such as fasting for a short day, spending a specific time in prayer before making a decision, or retreating into silence for a few hours to listen to your intuition. These minimal steps act as verification filters and help separate signal from noise. One of the most common pitfalls is confusing urgency with panic. The warning contained in messages may sound urgent because it calls for transformation. However, panic paralyzes and generates hasty decisions. Discernment protects us from this by teaching us to slow down the decision-making process, pause, pray, consult, act. This sequence reduces the likelihood of regret and increases the chance of decisions consistent with the values we wish to preserve. In practical terms, when faced with alarming news or a strong feeling, propose an internal ritual. Breathe deeply, say a brief prayer asking for light, schedule a 20-minute period of silence, and, if possible, talk to someone prudent before taking an action that could have permanent consequences. This simple chain of actions is a discernment routine that can completely change the course of a decision. There are also more subtle indicators that help map whether an impression holds true weight or is the result of collective anxiety. One sign of validity is coherence. If the same intuition or vision appears repeatedly in different contexts and maintains a coherent line with other signals, sacrament, prayer, change in attitudes, it gains strength. Another indicator is the transformative effect, a perception that leads to greater peace, more love, and decisions that promote the common good tends to be more reliable than one that fuels separation and fear. And finally, the communal criterion, that which, when shared with wise people, receives prudent confirmation, deserves attention. Discernment is not a solitary exercise of mental comparison. It is a relational process that depends on humility, listening, and the courage to renounce momentary certainties. Concrete discernment practices I recommend that align with the messages are simple and applicable. Before any important decision, set aside a minimum amount of time for silence and prayer. Examine your conscience at least once a day to identify impulses that might cloud your judgment. Keep an intuition journal where you record dreams, strong feelings, and recurring occurrences. After a few weeks, you'll develop patterns that help you validate or discard interpretations, and seek external guidance when the issue involves other lives or significant resources. These habits aren't academic. They are tools for spiritual work that shape your mindset and guide your decisions toward the desired impact. Another valuable technique is learning to distinguish symbolic from literal language. Many spiritual messages use images: fire, rose, seal, that call for translation into practical life. Always ask, does this image call me to change an attitude, a priority, a habit? If the answer is yes, transform the image into concrete action. For example, if fire appears as a metaphor for purification, the practical question is, what habit do I need to burn today to foster transformation? If rose appears as a symbol of restored beauty, the action might be to cultivate a daily gesture of kindness at home. Translating symbols into decisions is an act of maturity that avoids confusing literal interpretations and expands the ability to practically apply what is received. We must also consider the emotional dimension of discernment. Faith and emotion often go hand in hand. It's not about suppressing feelings, but about integrating them into a greater intelligence. When an intuition arrives, accompanied by calm and hope, it tends to be nourishing. When it's dominated by fear and hostility, it warrants caution. Therefore, learn to map your emotions as part of the process. Write them down, name them, and, if necessary, wait for them to settle before acting. This small exercise in emotional self-regulation is a practical skill that transforms decisions and prevents impulsive outbursts. In the community, the practice of discernment works best when there are channels of trust, prayer groups that practice listening, leaders who promote reflection, and communities that value thoughtfulness. Create an environment where signals are seriously verified. The journey of transformation is not a hermetic path. It is a collective effort that benefits those who seek truth with humility. And this humility is essential. Recognizing that we do not have all the answers opens the way for more balanced consultations and decisions that prioritize the common good. There's also a technical aspect that helps organize the process. Create personal verification criteria. These criteria might include consistency with tradition, confirmation by more than one reliable source, absence of immediate personal benefit that would distort judgment, and practical impact on the promotion of peace and good. By applying these filters, you reduce the chance of misinterpreting signals and increase the likelihood of acting wisely. Always remember that discernment isn't about postponing responsibility. It's about taking responsibility with methods that minimize the risk of error. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, and from here, we'll look at real examples and narratives that show how silence and discernment saved families from rash decisions, helped leaders choose paths of service, and enabled entire communities to shape more humane responses to adversity. Understanding these behind-the-scenes details is essential to transforming warnings into practice, so that the hidden truth ceases to be an enigma and becomes a blueprint for decisions that truly generate impact. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject and speak directly about what we call here the lost seal, an image that functions as an interpretative key, a symbol that weaves together the 7 lines of the messages and transforms a warning into a practical guide. The lost seal is not an archaeological object, nor a prophecy with a set date. It is an interpretative lens, a coalition of principles that, when recognized, alters mindsets and guides decisions with lasting impact. Saying this is inviting the listener to leave the passivity of curiosity and embark on a journey of application, identifying the seal as perceiving, where the hidden truth of the messages pulses and how it can translate into habits, choices, and small rituals that change the home and the community. Imagine for a moment an invisible metal plate. Running through each message, it holds the thread that connects conversion, prayer, fasting, family protection, silence, vigilance, and warning. Without this point of cohesion, the recommendations seem like scattered fragments. With it, they become a map. This metaphor helps understand why so many people describe a sense of coherence. When human miseries begin to respond to simple spiritual practices, the lost seal is this coherence. It is the practical sense that guides transformation, moving faith from the realm of intentions to the realm of daily decisions. And contrary to what those seeking spectacular signs imagine, this seal speaks of routine, discipline, and quiet courage of choices that seem small today, but that form the framework of a transformed life tomorrow. The final warning, he summarizes, is not a countdown alarm, it is a call to transformation. This is not a date, it is a call to transformation. This phrase summarizes the difference between temperamental prophecy and ethical calling. No one here announces a deadline set on the calendar, but many feel an ethical urgency to act now, before the consequences of misguided decisions crystallize. The seal, then, operates as a catalyst for decision-making. It asks what sacrifices are necessary, what prayers must be undertaken, what family rhythms need to be readjusted so that the home is not corroded by haste, consumption, and emotional dispersion. By understanding the seal, the religious community and families can transform anxiety into action, fear into discipline, rumors into responsible discernment. This synthesis has clear practical implications. First, it changes the way we measure signals. Instead of looking for extraordinary events, we begin to value indicators of a change in mindset, less reactivity in conversations, greater presence at meals, decisions made in community, a return to the sacraments with intention. Second, it redefines urgency. The urgency here is ethical, not apocalyptic. It is the speed with which you decide to repair a relationship, rearrange priorities, or adopt a habit of prayer that supports decisions. Using the seal as an interpretive lens allows us to transform the warning into a protocol. Small practices repeated consistently, tested, verified, and adapted according to the reality of each family. There's also a pedagogical dimension to this. Discovery. The seal serves as an interpretation manual for those who want to apply the messages without falling into extremism. It guides symbolic translation. For example, when an image of fire appears, the seal helps us ask whether the fire is called to the purification of a habit, the urgency of reconciliation, or the need to eliminate consumption that saps peace. When the rose appears, the seal asks whether there's a need to reintroduce beauty, kindness, and tenderness into relationships. This translation practice converts symbols into practical decisions, and that's where the impact becomes measurable. Fewer regrets, fewer mismatches, more choices that build. At the community level, Recognizing the lost seal also diminishes the temptation of mystical individualism. Instead of each person seeking signs in isolation, the seal invites us to check interpretations within a network of trust. Wise leaders, responsible prayer groups, and communities that test whether a perception brings greater peace and the common good. This filter prevents private interpretations from becoming drivers of rupture. The mindset that derives from the seal is collaborative. It prioritizes prudence and responsibility, guides decisions that protect the home, and fosters community growth rather than fueling panic or seeking exceptional events. To illustrate, consider a family that, faced with growing discomfort, applies the seal's lens. First, it investigates what changes in attitude can ease the mood. Then, it institutes practices symbolic fasting, prayer together, a designated time of silence, and observes simple indicators. Has the night become calmer? Have arguments decreased? Are decisions made with greater clarity? If the responses are positive, the seal has operated as a test of coherence between message and practice. If not, the application is reconsidered, adjusting small elements until the impact appears. It is an experimental method applied to everyday spirituality, observing, testing, adjusting, and consolidating practices that produce real transformation. It's important to emphasize that the seal does not replace authority, nor does it dispense with institutional prudence. The Church's serenity and the discernment of communities are part of the validation process. The seal is an tool that complements this work, not a shortcut to ignoring advice. The responsibility remains. Interpreting and applying it requires humility, listening, and a willingness to correct course. The journey of transformation guided by the seal is a humble practice of continuous adjustment, not an imposing dogma. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic and show, with stories and concrete signs, how the lost seal appeared in the lives of ordinary people where it was possible to identify. Step by step, the coherence between message and result. We'll follow stories that reveal behind-the-scenes decisions, revelations that transformed relationships, and practices that created a real impact on everyday life. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject and offer an honest reading of the tensions surrounding this phenomenon. Because addressing the messages of Medjugorje without acknowledging the public debate would be to oversimplify the story. There are undoubtedly spiritual fruits that many people testify to sincerely. Conversions, families rebuilding prayer habits, lives finding meaning, and decisions made more responsibly. These accounts carry weight and cannot be dismissed coldly. They are evidence of concrete transformation, of real impact on the daily lives of ordinary people. At the same time, there is an institutional stance that calls for caution. And this caution is a healthy mechanism, not an obstacle to faith. Protects communities from hasty interpretations and decisions driven by fleeting emotions. The tension between personal accounts and the prudence of ecclesiastical authorities is, in many ways, part of the necessary behind-the-scenes work to ensure that the hidden truth is treated seriously, not as a spectacle. A balanced approach consists of recognizing both sides, welcoming spiritual fruits as signs worthy of attention, but also subjecting extraordinary insights to criteria of verification, community dialogue, and discernment. Church authorities, over the years, have valued fruits, especially when these fruits translate into greater sacramental practice, works of charity, and family reconciliation, and at the same time have recommended prudence regarding predictions, dates, or interpretations that go beyond a call to conversion. This institutional stance is an invitation to humility. Not every spiritually alive phenomenon needs to be proclaimed as definitive. Often, life itself reveals the authenticity of a sign through time, coherence, and the fruits it produces in the community. Thus, interpreting messages requires method and heart, both analysis and openness to the mystery. Stories of transformation aren't infallible arguments, but they are important data. A family that recovers communion with the sacraments, an individual who overcomes addictions, a community that creates networks of support and prayer. All of this constitutes a body of evidence worth considering. On the other hand, there are stories whose isolated reading can lead to confusion, visions that assert deadlines, statements that spread without verification, interpretations that fuel fear instead of courage. This is where pastoral prudence comes in as a criterion of spiritual maturity, asking questions, verifying, discerning with other voices, and, when necessary, providing guidance so that the practice doesn't become a theater of fear. This balance between fruitfulness and caution is vital for the message to fulfill its transformative purpose, without losing community responsibility. When presenting these narratives to the public, it's important to use language that maintains credibility. Showing testimonies isn't sensationalism, it's about giving face to the practical consequences of the messages. At the same time, including comments from ecclesiastical authorities in a neutral, non-polarizing manner balance and avoids the trap of spectacle. Showing that there are agencies that investigate, that there are leaders who advise prudence, doesn't diminish the value of personal experience. On the contrary, it strengthens trust, because it indicates that the community cares about the truth and the well-being of the faithful. This combination of testimony and prudence transforms the dialogue into a safe space for those seeking to apply the messages without falling into extremes. There's also a pedagogical dimension to all this. The controversy leads to a pedagogical invitation on how to discern signals today, teaching the public to distinguish emotional turmoil from a legitimate call, to seek community confirmation, to verify coherence, and to value practical fruits. All of this forms a responsible mindset and a practice that produces real impact. This education in discernment protects against both absolute skepticism and uncritical enthusiasm. Teaching criteria, therefore, is a service to truth and transformation, because it enables those listening to make decisions with greater clarity and less risk of getting lost in interpretations that don't inform. In the technical realm of video, these elements can and should be handled sensitively, interspersing testimonies with balanced statements from authorities, using soundtracks that don't manipulate emotion beyond what's necessary, and inserting explanatory boxes that demonstrate the method of verification and discernment. Behind-the-scenes footage, images of communities in prayer, and cuts to recommended reading or brief practical instructions help structure the narrative without becoming sensational. A simple graphic showing observed fruits versus criteria of prudence can be educational and visually effective, as can a short clip with the voice of a priest or spiritual leader speaking about the importance of pastoral patience. All of this enhances the content's credibility while respecting those who seriously seek the truth. From a human perspective, controversy is also a mirror that reveals the fragility of our certainties and the need for community. When someone experiences something intense, the natural urge is to share and seek immediate confirmation. The community, however, has the task of listening with love, offering a veneer of experience, and, when necessary, guiding with prudence. This dynamic protects both the individual and the group. Therefore, when addressing this topic, it is appropriate to invite the audience to dialogue responsibly, to share what they have experienced, but also to seek guidance, share with trusted leaders, and welcome fraternal correction when it comes. This approach avoids ruptures and transforms curiosity into a path of growth. In terms of personal transformation, recognizing the need for prudence does not impede the experience of faith. Rather, it perfects it. The mindset that arises from this balance is practical. Those who integrate prudence and experience develop criteria for making wiser decisions, avoid unnecessary drama, and expand their capacity for action. The hidden truth of the messages, when filtered by community discernment and tested by their fruits, ceases to be exotic and becomes a tool for everyday change, a manual of care for those who want to reorient priorities, make decisions that promote the common good, and build habits that sustain faith and practice. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic and connect this critical reflection to the concrete practices we've already explored: conversion, prayer, fasting, protection, and silence, to show how institutional prudence can and should function as a support, not a barrier. We'll understand, through stories and examples, how communities balance spiritual experience with pastoral guidance and transformed restlessness into responsible action. Comment below, that makes sense to me. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining me on this investigation. If this content brought you something new, subscribe to the channel so I can continue to bring you research, stories, and reflections with care and responsibility. Subscribing is the simplest way to ensure we continue to delve deeper into these topics. If any part touched you in a special way, write in the comments. I'm with you until the end. I want to see who made it this far and read what resonated most with each of you. If you found it useful, leave a like. It's a discreet but powerful signal that it's worth investing more time in episodes like this. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click it and stay with me there. I promise to bring stories and examples that help you apply all of this in your daily life with clarity and care. Thank you for being here. We're on this journey together.